Boston, 1871. A string of mutilated children, a terrified neighborhood, and one unthinkable suspect, a 12-year-old boy with dead eyes and a private notebook no one was meant to see. Who was Jesse Pomeroy, and how did America allow a child to become its youngest known serial killer? The truth was buried. The truth, as you will soon discover, was buried beneath layers of silence, sealed archives, and a face too young to fear. For those brave enough to stare into the abyss of forgotten history, this channel is your sanctuary. Subscribe now, and in the comments, what state are you listening from? In December 1871, a battered 6-year-old boy was found in a Boston alley, barely able to speak but managing to whisper a name: Jesse Pomeroy. His account of being lured, bound, and tortured by an older boy echoed other chilling stories that had circulated in South Boston, claims of children being whipped, stabbed, or nearly drowned. Though the victims described a thin boy with a milky eye and a disturbing calm, authorities hesitated to believe such cruelty could come from a child. Jesse, the son of a widow, was known as odd but not dangerous. Still, patterns emerged. Teachers recalled his violent outbursts. Neighbors saw him kill animals. Denial persisted, as accepting the truth meant confronting a darkness born within the city itself. In a community defined by hard labor, religion, and silence, few were ready to face the possibility that the true monster could be a child hiding in plain sight. He was born in November of 1859, though in many ways Jesse Harding Pomeroy seemed to come into the world older than his years, more watcher than child. From the beginning, neighbors in Charlestown noted something off about the youngest Pomeroy boy: pale, sickly-looking, and quiet to the point of unnerving. Jesse's eyes, one of them clouded by a milky haze from an apparent birth defect, traily blinked and never warmed. He spoke in full sentences by age 3, but what he chose to say often left adults cold. His older brother Charles, by contrast, was rough and tumble and eager to please. Jesse was methodical. He preferred silence animals, and as would later emerge, the Pomeroy home was a house of contradictions. Thomas Pomeroy, the father, was a brutal disciplinarian who reportedly whipped Jesse for infractions as minor as tracking mud inside. He was a veteran of hard labor and harder beliefs, a man forged by the unforgiving standards of a working-class Boston still tangled in the legacy of Puritan severity. Thomas's methods were said to be character-building, though even among hardened families, his punishments were known to be excessive. But if the father ruled with the rod, the mother, Ruth Ann, ruled with delusion. She ran a modest dressmaking business from their parlor and defended Jesse fiercely, blindly, as if insulating him from the world would preserve whatever strange gift she believed he carried. "He is not like other boys," she once insisted to a neighbor. "There's something refined about him, something chosen." By the age of 8, Jesse had already gained a reputation among the other children, not as a friend or playmate, but as something else. He didn't laugh at jokes. He didn't cry when hit. He studied people the way other children studied maps or insects. One boy recalled that Jesse once cornered him in a stable, holding a pocket knife, asking what it would feel like to be opened, like in science books. The boy thought it was a joke until Jesse pressed the knife to his cheek. He got away with only a thin red line, but the fear never left him. Reports surfaced, slowly and quietly, of animals disappearing. A neighbor's cat, found with its limbs carefully broken and eyes gouged. A dog that turned up with wire burns around its neck. The incidents were shrugged off. Children, they said, could be cruel. Boys, especially. But doctors, when eventually called to evaluate Jesse after his arrest, would later write of an early fixation with inflicting pain, and referred to him, in the clinical language of the time, as a moral imbecile, a term reserved for those who showed no sense of right or wrong, no capacity for empathy, and no apparent desire for rehabilitation. From fragments of police interviews, journals, and long-lost court records, a portrait of Jesse's inner world begins to emerge. He kept, some say, a notebook hidden beneath the floorboards of his bedroom. Though it was never officially entered into evidence and vanished after his arrest, a constable later swore it existed. In it, Jesse had reportedly drawn diagram-styled figures, implements of restraint, even what appeared to be ritualistic markings. He had given each drawing a title. Whipping Boy, Number 3, Pin Game, Wet Knife. The constable refused to describe more. He only said, in a later letter, that it was not a child's imagination I saw in those pages. It was something darker, something studied. The question began to form, unspoken but constant. Was Jesse born broken, or made into what he became? Did the beatings instill cruelty, or awaken something already waiting? Was Ruth's denial the armor he wore to act without consequence? There were no clear answers, only patterns. And as those patterns began to harden, as the list of victims grew, the community would be forced to reckon with the truth. They were not dealing with a mischievous boy, nor even a violent one they were watching. Helplessly, as a monster revealed itself, one quiet, deliberate act at a time. It was the cold that kept him alive. The frost seeping through the stone floor of the basement beneath the South End tobacco shop numbed the bleeding just enough. A shopkeeper, curious about a lingering stench, had pried open a rusted door to the unused root cellar, lonely to find a boy curled in a corner, his shirt soaked in dried blood, wrists bound with twine, eyes wide and glassy with shock. He had been missing for 3 days. They said he didn't scream when they lifted him out, only whispered, "He's still out there." And when asked to describe his attacker, the details returned with an eerie clarity. Pale skin, a twisted eye, soft hands. He talked like a teacher, the boy said, and he smiled when I begged. The authorities, once again, faced the impossible. The description matched a boy already known to them, Jesse Harding Pomeroy. It wasn't the first time his name had surfaced, nor the second. Yet this case was different. This victim had survived. The injuries were undeniable. Whip marks, blade punctures, teeth impressions along the collarbone. This wasn't schoolyard roughhousing. This was ritualized cruelty. And still they hesitated. How could a boy of 12 do such a thing? That question alone seemed to stall the wheels of justice. The detectives involved were reluctant, not out of mercy, but out of fear for what such a truth would imply. If a child could design such methods, carry out such acts with precision and pleasure, what did it say about the systems meant to civilize him? To acknowledge Jesse's guilt meant confronting the ineffectiveness of parental discipline. Religious instruction, education it, meant admitting that a boy raised in their own community had chosen evil freely. In the weeks that followed, the papers danced carefully around the edges of the horror. The Boston Globe referred only to an incident involving local youths, while the transcript ran a single paragraph about a troubling act of violence behind a neighborhood shop. But whispers spread faster than ink. Children began walking to school in pairs. Mothers locked their doors in daylight. Clergy urged the community not to speculate, even as more boys went missing, some for hours, some forever. By then, the pattern was clear to anyone who dared to see it. All the victims were boys, aged 5 to 10. All had been lured by a promise: candy, toys, a game. All had been restrained, beaten, cut, and yet Jesse remained in his mother's home, seated at her dinner table, helping fold fabric in the dress shop's parlor. Ruth Pomeroy refused to acknowledge the rumors, insisting her son was being targeted by jealous boys and overactive imaginations. When confronted by a local minister about the mounting accusations, she said only, "My Jesse is a good boy. Gentle, he wouldn't harm a soul." And the authorities, afraid of the precedent, let her words stand for a time. There was talk of surveillance. One officer claimed to have followed Jesse to a freight yard, where he appeared to speak with a younger child before walking away abruptly. Another witness, a seamstress who shared a wall with the Pomeroy shops, said she once heard a high-pitched scream late at night, followed by muffled footsteps. Nothing was done. Without a confession, without a body, the case against Jesse remained circumstantial. And in that grey space of doubt, he thrived. Until one morning in early spring, he was simply gone. Ruth claimed he had left for errands and not returned. Charles, the older brother, said Jesse had been acting strange, restless, secretive. A boy with no money and no friends had vanished into a city thick with suspicion. Some thought he had fled. Others whispered something darker, that he had gone underground, that there were places in Boston a child could hide for weeks. One boy, when questioned, said Jesse told him there was a room with a lock and no light where he could stay as long as he wanted. It sounded like a lie. But by then, everything about Jesse Pomeroy sounded like a lie except the scars he left behind. It was April when the thaw revealed what the snow had hidden. The ground had softened just enough for a local laborer, cutting through an empty lot behind the Pomeroy family's old neighborhood, to notice the corner of a tattered cloth protruding from the soil. At first, he thought it might be discarded laundry. Then he saw the shoe small, scuffed, and pointed the wrong way. The body was that of a girl, no more than 4. Her name was Horace Mullen. She had been missing for weeks. Her throat was slashed with surgical precision, and the wound across her chest suggested something far more deliberate than panic or impulse. Near her grave, barely covered by loose dirt and dead leaves, was a broken toy, wedged into the earth like a forgotten offering. The city's patience snapped. Jesse Pomeroy was arrested within hours. The trial began that summer, but it felt less like justice and more like a controlled detonation, slow, loud, and meant to keep the city from tearing itself apart. Courtroom sketches from the time show Jesse seated with unnerving composure, his hair neatly combed, lips slightly upturned, as if observing a game in which he had already won. He was now 14, but the crimes under discussion belonged to someone far colder than his age could explain. The courtroom was packed, daily doctors, clergy, housewives, editors, each of them trying to reconcile the face of a child with the accusations unraveling before them. The prosecution opened with the physical evidence, the body, the location, Jesse's history, and, most damningly, the statement he gave at the time of his arrest. When asked if he had killed the Mullen girl, Jesse allegedly replied, "I suppose I did." When pressed further, he added, "She didn't cry much." This confession, delivered without hesitation, sent a ripple of nausea through the gallery. His mother, Ruth, fainted during its reading. But the defense countered with uncertainty. Doctors were called to determine Jesse's mental state, and their opinions fractured like glass. One labeled him morally insane, a boy devoid of conscience, but not technically mad. Another insisted Jesse knew exactly what he was doing, and took perverse pleasure in it. A third suggested he suffered from seizures that might lead to dissociative behavior. The court, unequipped to pass the emerging field of forensic psychology, leaned heavily on spectacle and instinct. Jesse's smile, calm, persistent, unblinking, did more to persuade the jury than any testimony. The press fed the frenzy. Editorials questioned how a mother could raise such a child. Others asked whether Jesse was the product of a broken home, or evidence of something deeper evil, manifesting not in adulthood, but in youth. The word monster began to appear in headlines, not metaphorically, but literally. Boston's boy monster, the white-eyed fiend. And yet, amid the hysteria, an unsettling rumor began to circulate quietly, unofficially, and always without confirmation. It was said that during his early confinement at the House of Detention, guards discovered a notebook hidden beneath the straw mattress in Jesse's cell. According to those who claimed to have seen it, the pages contained not just drawings, though there were plenty of those, often depicting bound figures, implements of torture, and strange symbols, but also A-list names, dozens of them, some crossed out, some accompanied by crude maps or descriptions. Most were unrecognizable, but a few matched the surnames of local families, whose children had vanished in previous years without explanation. The notebook was never entered into evidence. Officially, it didn't exist. The warden denied its presence. One guard later told a reporter, anonymously, that he had been ordered to destroy it. It was never meant to be seen, he said. It would have changed everything. Jesse was convicted not of murder. He was too young, they said, for the gallows, but sentenced to life in solitary confinement. The judge, while reading the sentence, refused to look at him. Jesse simply nodded. Ruth wept, and the court adjourned under a silence heavier than any gavel. Outside, the city exhaled, but uneasily. The monster was caged, yes, but no one could answer the question that hung in the air. Unspoken but thunderous, were those names real? And if so, how many were never found? The door closed behind him in 1876 and never opened again. 13 years old when he was first placed in solitary confinement, Jesse Pomeroy would live, if one can call it, living in near total isolation for the next 41 years. No sunlight, no conversation, no mercy. The cell at the Massachusetts State Prison in Charlestown was 5 feet wide, 7 feet long, and windowless. It was a cage built not simply to hold a body, but to extinguish whatever remained of a mind that had already proven its unnatural appetites. Over time, Jesse faded from the headlines. But he did not disappear. His mother continued to petition for his release until her death, insisting on her son's innocence even as the world moved on. He was, in her eyes, the victim of fear, of misunderstanding, of a society too eager to find evil in a boy who had merely been different. But those who worked within the prison told a different story. They said Jesse scratched marks into the stone walls, using pieces of rusted metal pried from his bed frame. Some of the markings were dates, others resembled runes. One guard recalled finding a sequence of symbols arranged like a star, surrounding a name Horus. The symbols reappeared, again and again, across decades. Denied access to writing tools for years, Jesse found other methods. He smeared words onto the walls, using blood drawn from his own wrists. He submitted appeals scrawled on scraps of linen, torn from his clothes, stitched together with strands of his hair. In one such appeal, preserved in the state archive but rarely displayed, Jesse wrote, "I am not dead, though they have buried me." Another letter, never officially logged but reportedly intercepted, was addressed to the next boy and contained only the sentence, "They will never find your name." To the end, he refused to admit guilt. Or rather, he refused to speak in terms anyone could clearly interpret. His language became increasingly riddled with metaphor, contradiction, and cryptic phrasing. One prison psychologist described a conversation with Jesse in which he claimed that pain is the only way to understand truth, and that children are closer to God because they haven't learned to lie yet. When asked if he regretted anything, Jesse responded, "What I did was necessary." The world needed to look. His behavior defied diagnosis. He was not schizophrenic. He was not delusional in any conventional sense. He remained lucid, articulate, and highly intelligent. But something fundamental was absent, or perhaps something had never been there to begin with. In the early 20th century, as psychiatry began to evolve, Jesse Pomeroy became a point of reference in academic journals. The boy who never grew up, not just biologically, but morally. Some argued he represented a failure of nurture. Others insisted he was proof of inherent evil, a throwback, a genetic echo of something primeval and violent. He died in 1932, blind in one eye, nearly deaf, emaciated, and reportedly smiling. The official cause was heart failure. He was buried without ceremony in a prison cemetery under a numbered marker. No one came to claim his body. No family remained. His cell was sealed, then converted into storage. But even decades later, guards told stories of faint scratching sounds behind the walls, and of symbols reappearing long after being scrubbed away. They laughed when they told these tales, but always quietly. To this day, the full contents of Jesse's alleged prison journal have never been released. If it ever truly existed, it was either destroyed or hidden, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of shame. But the questions linger. Did he act alone? Were there other names on that list, children who disappeared, never connected to him, never spoken of again? And perhaps most disturbing of all, could it happen again? Could another child, somewhere right now, be watching, waiting, learning how to wear the mask of innocence until it no longer fits? Some stories close with answers. Others, like this one, simply stop. The rest is left for us to wonder.